Beta. Apparatus 5 Hydra. Elapsed time Omega-3, minus 734.29. CHO, Phemus IV, Tharsis Heights. The planet was slowly turning itself inside out, though Phemus IV had been quietly raging for millennia. A crepuscular ball of igneous rock and soot storms, it was covered in a rash of volcanic eruptions. Cracked through with glowing fractures, it resembled a celestial bauble that had been dropped and was about to shatter. The only creatures to make their homes in the Phemusian nightmare were migrant tribes of greenskins that routinely roamed the lava-dashed landscape in order to avoid seasonal eruptions. Sergeant Goron Setebos only knew these tribes by the banners they carried and the crude symbols painted on their corrugated hovels. Squad Sigma had ascribed names to the tribes based upon the scrawled iconography. The Spumers, the Green Devils, the Scorchers, the Magma Tusks, the Fireball Clan. For the past month, the Alpha Legionnaires had been engaged in a war by proxy. They had not killed a single greenskin or even discharged a single round from their soot-smeared bolters. They were shadowing a far more dangerous prey across the volcanic highlands, razor-blade canyons, and dismal basalt plains. The 5th Legion. The Khan's swift savages. The infamous White Scars. Black rock crumbled in Setebos' grasp. If his palm hadn't been protected by the ceramite of his gauntlet, the remaining shard of glassy rock would have pierced straight through. The sergeant was clinging to a rock face, punching handholds and toe-picking his way up the midnight crag. Beneath him, the 9 other members of Squad Sigma followed up through his improvised purchase points. Glooping beside them was a sluggish lava fall, a slow-moving torrent of molten rock that bathed the armored legionnaires in the perpetual heat of a furnace. At the top of the escarpment, Setebos unlocked his bolter from his belt and crunched through the gravel of a volcanic crater. Magma had eaten through the rim to create the falls, and Setebos chose his footing carefully around the bubbling margins. One by one, the Alpha Legionnaires made their way over to the far side of the crater, their grimy plate glinting in the fiery glow.
"This looks good," he said. "Isidore."
Legionnaire Isidore consulted a scuffed and scorched data slate, turning it and his armored form around to match their most recent relief maps with the surrounding topography. He gestured east with an outstretched gauntlet.
"If the fireballs haven't started moving by now,"
he announced,
"this should light a fire under their monstrous asses."
He handed the slate to Vermes, who counterchecked his cartography.
"This channel should then join with the one from this morning,"
Setebos murmured.
"Affirmative."
The whole squad remembered all too well the channel they had crossed with some difficulty a few hours before. Braxis had almost pitched into the hellish river of molten rock. Behind them, Crate had started to prepare a cache of seismic charges, which the Legionnaire punched into the crater wall with his gauntlet.
"The greenskins in Quadrant 717 should be funneled through to this gorge here, with little choice but to join the magma tusks. Unless they just attack them like the last lot did,"
Braxis murmured.
"Always a possibility with orcs,"
Setebos agreed.
"Crate, are we ready? 2 more charges, 10 more seconds. Legionnaires, over the edge,"
Setebos ordered. Squad Sigma hauled themselves over the lip of the crater before skidding down through the grit and scree of the volcanic slope. The Alpha Legionnaires had been doing this for weeks, trekking across the infernal landscape and strategically setting their demolitions. Remaining an unseen and undetected presence, various covert teams like Sigma had frustrated the White Scar's hopes of a swift Xenos extermination in the local systems by maneuvering the greenskin warrior tribes on Phemus IV into tactically superior strategic formations. By forcing the groups together and concentrating the greenskins in larger numbers, Setebos and his squad had succeeded in bogging the Khan's warriors down in countless meat-grinding engagements. The White Scars themselves could now only dream of racing over the open plateaus, fragmenting the tribes and cutting the orcs to pieces, as was their wont.
Sergeant!
Isidore hissed over the Voxlink.
Contacts!
Making their ungainly way down the gorge at the foot of the slope was a ragged string of orcs. They bore the crude iconography of the Fireball clan and carried an assortment of mismatched weaponry. Some were wounded, suggesting that they were only a splinter group of a larger tribe that had been caught in some kind of ambush.
Take cover,
Setebos ordered over the Voxlink.
and do not engage. I repeat, do not engage.
As the Legionnaires scrambled into less than desirable cover on the scree slope, the orcs continued their wretched stomp up the ravine. Taking positions behind crags and boulders, the thick coating of ash on their plate went some way to disguise the Space Marines from the Xenos barbarians. Remaining completely still, Setebos, who was closest to the ravine floor, watched the monsters lope past, oblivious. The rumble of distant eruptions was suddenly cut through by the high-pitched whine of engines, and looking back down the gorge, Setebos caught sight of 3 Imperial jet bikes rounding the volcano's flank. He had no idea how the White Scars kept their plate and vehicle so clean and white in the rain of ash and soot clouds. The Scars tracked in on the column of orcs. They had probably already been searching for them, Setebos reasoned. The Khan's hunters were not known for allowing their prey to escape. They leaned into the handlebars of their mounts and gunned the wailing engines, tearing up the gorge, trailing a cloud of soot in their wake. Bolt fire ripped up through the greenskins at the rear of the column, bringing the rest of the monsters into sudden and savage life, their brute weapons ready. The White Scars hammered through fully half of the beasts before accelerating overhead. One patchwork monster swung its axe at one of the oncoming vehicles. The White Scar rider simply leaned out to one side, allowing the butcher's blade to pass harmlessly over his helmet. Setebos watched the riders rocket away around the volcano base. It was classic 5th Legion tactics. The greenskins, normally so formidable as a sea of crude blades and blazing gunfire, were now scattered and grunting furiously with their weapons held high. Within moments, the jet bikes were back, strafing the mindless creatures with more streams of bolt fire. Their fellows dropping about them in ragged heaps, the final 2 brutes roared at the swarthy sky. The first jet bike passed between them at high speed, prompting both to take optimistic swings. Predictably, the second and third White Scars glided in after them, curved chainswords screaming as they cut the monsters down. With one greenskin's head hanging from his body by only a thread, and the other clutching its spilling innards, the White Scar's work was done. Turning and idling back up to the site of the massacre, the Scars dismounted. Slipping their heads out of their helmets, the Khan's warriors allowed the luxurious length of their hair and mustaches to fall freely, before drawing their short, curved blades and stabbing at the fallen orcs to ensure the monsters were truly dead. Only one of the 3, an eagle-eyed warrior indeed, caught sight of something amiss on the volcano side. A shape that seemed out of place, perhaps? Stepping back to his bike, he slipped a pair of magnoculars from the saddlebag and brought them up to his dark, piercing eyes. The White Scar would have called out, either to the armored legionnaire hiding on the rubble-strewn slope, or, more likely, to alert his own brethren. But he could do neither, with Setebos' blade at his throat, and the Alpha Legion sergeant holding him by his hair. Suddenly aware that they were under attack, the 2 remaining White Scars made for their jet bikes. The first saw Braxis coming for him. He snatched the length of his serrated chain blade from a sheath that ran the length of the mount, and with a harsh battle cry swung it back around in a whirling arc. Braxis was forced to abandon his tackle and slide down through the grit and onto his side. But the White Scar was swift to recover. Even so, Arcan and Charmian cannoned into him, one slamming into the Space Marine with his domed pauldron, while the other went for the weapon. Isidore was nowhere near the third White Scar by the time he reached his jet bike. Instead of going for his weapon, the Scar leapt and mounted the vehicle. The maneuver was accomplished with the grace and confidence of one born in the saddle. And before the Alpha Legionnaires could do anything, the White Scar had leaned around and banked the accelerating vehicle back up the craggy gorge. Setebos' blade slipped through his struggling prisoner's throat with ease.
Isidore, jam his transmissions,
the sergeant barked, pointing with the bloodied tip of the knife. Isidore skidded around the two Legionnaires, still wrestling with their foe on the basalt, and scrambled for the jet bike's comms.
Got it,
he called. Setebos watched the escaping jet bike streak for freedom. Xantine brought his bolter up, but the sergeant placed his ceramite palm on the weapon's barrel. There would be no convenient but cacophonous firefights, with the distinctive sound of reciprocal bolter fire betraying the presence of another Space Marine force on Phemus IV. As always, the Alpha Legion would remain unheard, unseen, and unknown.
Great. Yes, Sergeant. Now.
The detonators fired. The seismic charges set in the crater wall blasted the igneous rock into glassy splinters. Rubble crashed down the volcano side, bouncing and shattering as it rolled its way down into the ravine. The fleeing biker saw the danger. He tried to turn, but there simply wasn't enough room. The Space Marine tucked to the side and slipped from his saddle, skidding and clattering through the volcanic shale in his armor plate. The jet bike struck the growing wall of shattered rock and tumbling debris and became a brief nova of light, sound, and twisted shrapnel. Setebos saw the White Scar scrambling through the black gravel before getting to his feet. He ran with powered, determined steps, pulverizing the grit under his boots. The spilled magma was coming. The explosion, designed to sound like any other violently erupting volcano, had opened the molten floodgates. A torrent of radiant death flowed down the slope towards the White Scar. The Alpha Legionnaires watched the lava swell eat up the incline and then flood the gorge, just as Crate and Isidore had intended. The flow swamped the stricken Space Marine, knocking him from his feet and plunging him shoulder and then face first beneath the surface. The White Scar flailed only for a moment, his immaculate ceramite scorching before sinking, backpack and all, beneath the slurping surface with a flare of powered discharge. Charmian looked to his sergeant.
Sir?
There were 3 of them now, pinning the remaining White Scar face down against the ravine floor.
Make it quick,
Setebos hissed, before directing the rest of the squad up a slightly more forgiving incline on the opposite slope. The White Scar screamed furious insults at his captors, but they did not last long. Charmian took the sides of the Space Marine's head in his powered gauntlets and twisted it violently to the side. There was a splintering crack, and the White Scar's resistance became a limp slump before the Legionnaires released him. As Squad Sigma made their way up the craggy slope, the gully behind them glowed. The disgorged river of molten destruction had replaced the site of the brief battle, scouring any evidence of the Alpha Legion's presence from the face of the planet.
Hold.
Setebos suddenly halted. The Legionnaires held their positions, scanning the charred landscape for more greenskins.
More scars?
Isidore put to the sergeant, but Setebos was holding the side of his helmet with his gauntlet against the rumble of volcanic eruptions rolling across the tortured land. After a moment, he turned to them once more.
We're being recalled. Something special. I've been given extraction coordinates.
Isidore nodded with approval, but the rest of them gave their sergeant only the blank optics of their helmets.
Let's move. With any good fortune, we'll be off this rock within the hour.